daughters behind him and said, "Oh God, you are wonderful and powerful and created such amazing creatures. Please don't let him eat my daughters. As you love all your creation, I love them." Then he turned and plunged back into the ocean.
According to conventional wisdom, the dinosaurs lived from about 250 million years ago to about 65 million years ago. The reason why they say that is after the so-called Cretaceous layers, you don't find any more dinosaur fossils above there. And so they believe the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago. And they believe that man only evolved in the last 2 million years, say, because we only find human fossils at the very top of the layers. And so man and dinosaurs, in their view, could never have lived together because they would be separated by over 60 million years.
An evolutionist would look at the fossil record, and they would, based on their idea that the Earth is ancient and that the present is the key to the past, and they would look at natural processes which act very slowly, they would say, therefore, the fossil record must have accumulated very slowly. And because it's such a slow process, it's actually, you can look at it and look at different eras of time. And so in this section, these fossils are buried. That means that these fossils are alive at one point in time. And then if there's a layer that appears above that, well, that must be a later period of time. There's a different set of fossils being buried there. That's a snapshot of a different period of time. And then they build this very elaborate tree structure of all of life, and they build this very elaborate model of the geologic record.
Well, basically what they do is look at the sedimentary rock units in the Jurassic layer, and they find some dinosaurs there, and they say because we find dinosaurs here, this particular layer is at least 70, 75 million years old. And so it is a tautology where they date the fossils by the rock layers, and they date the rock layers by the fossils that they find in them. And so it is a cause for circuitous or circular reasoning.
I did 1 year of geology in my university, and it's interesting that the head of the department said the fossil record does not support Darwinian evolution. He said this plainly. He made it clear he was not a creationist, but he did say the fossil record seems to support a series of divine creation. This I heard from the professor of geology. And professor in New Zealand was the highest rank of university teachers, not just any old lecturer.
Well, fossils are formed only under special circumstances. I'm a marine biologist. I'm a scuba diver. I lost count after about 500 scuba dives. And it's funny because most people think marine biologists study whales and dolphins, but really most marine biologists study worms and bacteria and mud. And so in my life, I've studied a lot of mud. I've dug mud in lakes, rivers, and streams all over the southeast. I'll looked at the sediments all up and down the Florida Keys, over in the Bahamas, in Belize, one trip to the South Pacific, which was very nice. And all that digging and all that sand and all that dirt and all that mud, I've never found a fish skeleton. I've never found an incipient fossil. I've never found something that was being fossilized. Because fish, when they die, when they finally do hit the bottom, they're eaten by everything. And usually they're eaten on the way down. And so their bones tend to be scattered all over the place, and their flesh is destroyed. And even if they land in the mud, the bones dissolve over time in the water. They're made of calcium carbonate. It's soluble in seawater. It takes special circumstances to make a fossil. And most of those circumstances are met by Noah's flood, where you have a very rapid amount of sedimentation. We have lots of fossils being buried very quickly, being sealed off away from oxygen, and then being impregnated by the minerals that dissolved in the water that can recrystallize inside those bones, prevent them from dissolving away, and you get a fossil.
I believe those dinosaurs were buried in sediment at the time of Noah's flood, which would have been about 4,000 years ago. So either at the time of the flood or at some point after the flood, during the runoff, because all the dinosaurs that we know of, with rare exception, are buried in water-deposited sediment. As Ken Ham says, if there really was a worldwide flood, you'd expect to see billions of things buried in rock layers deposited by water all over the earth. And what you really see are billions of dead things buried in rock layers deposited by water all over the earth. And that is certainly true of the dinosaurs. And when you read about them, they always are described as having wandered too close to an inland sea or lake, and maybe got a little tipsy and fell in. And before their flesh could rot, before scavengers could eat it, they became encased in a very cementatious rock. This isn't going on today. I have rabbits and squirrels in my backyard. I don't know what happens to them when they die. I've never seen any little rabbit funerals or anything like that. And I'll tell you, they're certainly not making fossils.
You can't get a fossil. If a dinosaur died in the forest, it's going to rot away and get scavenged. And you can see that in the farms today. You don't see sheep and cattle's fossilized. And you have to bury them quickly. And when you have something like a global flood, you're going to bury lots of creatures. And that's why we find lots of fossil dinosaur graveyards where they've been washed in, like the Iguanodon graveyard, which makes sense if you've got a huge catastrophe, a watery catastrophe. And of course, when you have a watery catastrophe, you don't need millions of years to explain the rock layers either.
Right behind me is what is called a polystrate fossil. Poly meaning many, straight meaning strata. So here's a fossil that is straight up and down, going through many layers of strata. And what is significant about that? Well, first off, the conventional wisdom around here in the Hell Creek Formation is that it could take 1,000 years, a centimeter, to lay down all of the sedimentary deposits. Well, is that polystrate fossil behind me going to wait around for 100,000 years while slowly all of the sediment is put in around it to hold it straight up? No. It's going to decompose, it's going to fall over long before that happened. It had to have been done very, very quickly.
There are some fish fossils that I've seen with exquisite preservation. All the scales, all the fins are intact, the fish's mouth is closed, his gills are closed, which is indication that he's buried in squish. In fact, the streamlines around the fish in the mud, it looks like he was struggling and trying to swim as he's being buried. We've got abundant evidence of rapid fossilization. There's some three-dimensional dinosaurs that are preserved where a dinosaur is crouching down and yet he's covered in mud, and the only way to do that is if the mud is accumulating so quickly that he's literally suffocated in the mud. Because if he had died, he would have fallen over, or at least would have laid down flat. But no, he's crouching. The mud covers all the way up above his head.
And Mount St. Helens is certainly an excellent example, because we saw things happen there that blew geologists' mind. May 1980, the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and the next, in that major eruption and subsequent ones, up to 600 feet of rock layers, new material was deposited around Mount St. Helens. And at one particular level, we find a 20-foot horizon that was produced on June 12, 1980. We know the day and the year because people were there to observe it. So it's testable. You know, we've got reliable eyewitness accounts. But within that 20-foot thick layer, we have multiplicity of small layers, alternating coarse and fine-grained layers. Now, a geologist normally looking at that with a millions of years belief system, we call it mental glasses, looking through the idea of millions of years, who would have thought that each of those little bands would have taken thousands of years to accumulate, or alternating yearly sequences, and so the whole sequence, hundreds of them, would have taken hundreds of years. But we observed it to happen in just one day.
The rock layers are not a sequence of age, but a sequence of burial. Taking their age interpretation, they shouldn't be, the coelacanths have died out. Yet we know they're living today. People will ask, why are there no dinosaur and humans fossilized together? I would ask, why are there no coelacanths and whales fossil together, even though they live in the sea together? It's because they just weren't buried together.
Now, how do you explain that by slow and gradual processes with little local floods over millions of years? No, only a global flood can explain rock layers with marine fossils up on the continents that were catastrophically deposited and buried that swept right across the continents and between continents. I mean, the evidence is crying out for catastrophe. It screams Noah's flood, it therefore screams a young Earth.
You know, radiometric dating is seen as the linchpin of the evolutionary age of the Earth. They say, oh, all these radiometric dating techniques show the Earth is ancient, so how can you believe in a young Earth? Well, actually, what I do is I appeal to known lava flows. Go to Hawaii, sample a lava flow, sample some basalt that's come out of the